Part 2, 18 Minutes in the Darkness. 3 months had passed since Elena Vargas stepped out of the elevator at that billionaire's row tower, her hand gripping Leo's, a canvas bag over her shoulder, holding everything that remained of her life in that penthouse. Life after being fired wasn't a fall. It was free fall with no ground in sight. The 2 months of severance Arthur Vance had so generously provided, $14,000 before taxes, vanished faster than she could have imagined. She and her sister Rosa had pooled their resources to rent a modest 2-bedroom apartment in Jamaica, Queens. The rent was $2,800 a month, which meant first month, last month, and a security deposit took $8,400 before they even unpacked a single box. That left barely $5,000 to survive on. Electricity, gas, internet for Leo's schoolwork, another $400. Leo's medications, the inhaled corticosteroids, the bronchodilators, the antibiotics for his fragile lungs, cost nearly $2,000 a month now that her employer-sponsored health insurance was gone. The private plan Shed managed to find, the cheapest available on the New York State Exchange, had a deductible so high it was practically useless for anything short of a catastrophe. Shed applied for more than 40 jobs: private housekeeper, home health aide, elderly care assistant. She had experience. She had her nursing license. She had references from previous positions. But there was a problem, a 3-year gap in her resume. 3 years working for Arthur Vance that she couldn't list by name because of the confidentiality agreement Shed signed. 3 years Shed existed as a ghost, and now that ghost had nothing to prove Shed ever been real. The rejections came in polite emails, in phone calls that ended too quickly, in interviews where the hiring manager's eyes glazed over when she couldn't explain what Shed been doing since 2023. Finally, she found work through an old friend from nursing school, Sarah Chen, who was head nurse at a private rehabilitation facility in upstate New York. Sarah had introduced Elena to the building management company of Vance Capital itself, which was hiring on-site clinic nurses for the tower's internal medical office. "You're sure you want to work in his building?" Sarah had asked her over the phone, worry thick in her voice. "Every day you walk in, you'll pass the place that threw you out like garbage." Elena had been quiet for a long moment before answering. "I need money, Sarah. Leo needs his medicine. And that clinic pays more per hour than anywhere else I can find. I don't have a choice." She started on January 10th. Morning shift, 6:30 to 3 in the afternoon. Her job was to staff the internal medical clinic on the ground floor, handling minor emergencies for the building's employees. Headaches, stomach aches, paper cuts, blood pressure checks for those needing health certifications. Sometimes she had to go up to the executive floors to inspect emergency medical equipment, as required by FDNY regulations. Every morning, walking into the building, Elena had to pass through the main lobby, where an enormous portrait of Arthur Vance hung on the wall, his face cold, his eyes staring straight into the camera. She never looked up at that portrait. She walked quickly, eyes forward, medical bag tight against her shoulder, trying not to think about the fact that he was somewhere up on the 82nd floor, living in the penthouse she had once cleaned, eating meals she had once cooked, existing in a world she had once been an invisible part of. Leo never asked about the tall man with the cold eyes. Maybe the boy had forgotten, or maybe, with the early wisdom of children who have lived through too much, he understood that there were questions not to be asked, wounds not to be touched. But Elena did not forget. She couldn't. Every night, lying next to Leo in their small bedroom, listening to the soft wheeze of his breathing, she wondered, should I pray for him? Should I hope he's all right? And the answer was always more complicated than she wanted to admit. There are moments in life when we are forced to face those who have hurt us, and we must decide who we will be in that moment. Elena and Arthur's story is a reminder that forgiveness isn't always for the other person. Sometimes it's for ourselves. If you're finding meaning in this story, please subscribe and turn on notifications. We release new stories every week, and you won't want to miss what's coming next. February 14th, 6:30 in the morning. Elena arrived at the Vance Capitol building as she did every day. She wore her light blue nurse's uniform, hair tied back neatly, medical bag slung across her shoulder. The internal clinic was on the ground floor, near the employee entrance. She unlocked the door, turned on the lights, checked the medicine cabinet, and began her shift. 6:45. First task of the day: inspect emergency medical equipment on the executive floors, as required by FDNY regulations. Elena pushed her supply cart into the service elevator and pressed the button for the 80th floor. The elevator stopped at various levels: 20, 40, 60. But she didn't step out. She just stood there, watching the LED numbers change, feeling the silence of the building in the early morning, before thousands of employees flooded in and turned the place into a noisy machine. 80th floor. The elevator doors opened. The VIP hallway was carpeted in thick charcoal gray, lit by soft wall sconces. The offices here were larger, with heavy oak doors and brass nameplates bearing the names of the most powerful people in the corporation. Elena had walked this hallway many times during her 3 years working for Arthur, but always through the service entrance, always in silence, always invisible. Now she walked it as a medical professional, with a legitimate job, with a legitimate reason to be here. But she still felt like an intruder. She checked the first AED, automated external defibrillator, mounted on the wall near the elevator. Opened the case, checked the battery, checked the expiration dates on the electrode pads. All in order. She noted it on her clipboard form. Next was the emergency oxygen tank in the glass cabinet near the executive vice president's office. She checked the pressure, the valve, the mask, all up to standard. 6:48. Elena pushed her cart down the hallway, heading toward the CEO's office at the end. She needed to check the AED and oxygen there, Arthur Vance's office. As she approached, she noticed the heavy oak door was slightly ajar. Not fully open, just a small gap, as if someone had forgotten to close it all the way. This wasn't normal. Arthur Vance was obsessive about security and privacy. His office door was always closed, always locked, always protected by biometric card access. Elena stopped, listening, and then she heard it. The sound of porcelain shattering, the sharp crash of ceramic hitting marble, followed by a muffled groan, as if someone were trying to scream but couldn't. Elena's heart pounded. Her nursing instinct, the instinct trained in nursing school, honed through thousands of hours in emergency rooms, flared up instantly. She didn't think. She didn't hesitate. She pushed her supply cart aside and ran toward the partially open door. She pushed through into the luxurious pantry area adjacent to the CEO's office, and she saw him. Arthur Vance lay on the cold marble floor, the right side of his body motionless, his face twisted, his eyes wide in absolute terror. Around him were the shattered pieces of an espresso cup and a spreading pool of black coffee. "Mr. Vance." Elena rushed to him, kneeling at his side. She checked his wrist pulse, weak, irregular. She checked his pupils. Left side constricted normally, right side dilated, classic signs of an ischemic stroke. "I'm calling for help," she said, her voice shaking but firm. She pulled out her phone, her finger already on the 9, ready to dial 911. But at that very moment, the VIP elevator at the end of the hallway chimed softly. The doors opened. Evelyn Cross stepped out. Evelyn Cross, 52 years old, was the chief operating officer of Vance Capitol, second in command only to Arthur. She had worked with Arthur for 10 years, learning his every trick, his every strategy, his every weakness. She wore a perfectly tailored black suit, her short silver hair carefully styled, her sharp eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses. She had arrived early to review the presentation slides for the merger vote at 8 o'clock, the vote that Arthur would chair, the vote that, if successful, would bring Vance Capitol billions and cement Arthur's status as a living legend of Wall Street. Evelyn saw Elena kneeling beside Arthur, phone in hand. She saw Arthur on the floor, motionless, his face twisted, and in that moment something happened in Evelyn's eyes. Not panic, not concern, but a cold, quick, ruthless calculation. She walked forward, her high heels clicking on the marble floor. "What are you doing here?" Evelyn asked, her voice eerily calm. "Hez having a stroke. I need to call 911. Elena held up her phone, her finger still on the call button. Evelyn moved faster than Elena expected. She snatched the phone from Elena's hand and threw it into the marble sink. The phone hit the basin, fell in, the screen shattering. "No!" Elena cried out, reaching for the phone. Evelyn blocked her, pushing her back against the wall. "Who are you?" Evelyn asked, though she knew exactly who Elena was. And here was the thing. Evelyn Cross was not someone who missed details. When Arthur had ordered Elena's termination 3 months ago, Evelyn, as COO, the person overseeing all senior personnel matters, had requested Elena's personnel file. She wanted to ensure the termination was handled properly, with no legal risk, and in that file she had read everything: immigration, status, employment history, information about her son, even her credit report. Evelyn had memorized it all, not because she cared about Elena, but because she always collected information. In Evelyn's world, information was a weapon, and now she had a weapon. "You're a building management clinic nurse," Evelyn said, her voice cold as ice, "not the CEO's personal physician. You have no authority to intervene in his private space without authorization." "He's dying," Elena shouted, tears beginning to fall. "He needs emergency help right now." Evelyn leaned down, pressing her face close to Elena's, and whispered words Elena would never forget. "I know your visa status, Elena. I know you're in the middle of a renewal period, and I know that if you're arrested for trespassing and theft of corporate property, yes, I'll say you broke into the CEO's pantry to steal his Rolex. ICE will be here in 10 minutes. You'll be deported immediately, and your son, Leo, he'll be taken into state foster care." Elena stood there, trembling, feeling the blood freeze in her veins. "Choose," Evelyn continued, her whisper sharp as a knife. "Save this dying old man and lose everything: your son, your freedom, your future, or walk out of this room right now and pretend you never saw anything. We've all faced moments when we had to choose between what's right and what's safe. Moments when the price of courage is higher than we can pay. Elena is standing in one of those moments right now, and her choice will haunt her for the rest of her life. If this story is touching your heart, please share it with someone who needs to hear this message. And don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss what comes next, where we'll explore the consequences of this choice." Elena looked at Arthur. He was lying there, his eyes wide, trying to speak but unable to make a sound. He was pleading with her. She could see it in his eyes. The fear, the desperation, the late realization that he was depending on the very woman he had thrown out like garbage. And Elena thought about Leo. She thought about his face when he slept, his dark curls spread across the pillow. She thought about his laugh when he watched cartoons, about the way he held her hand when crossing the street, about the promise she had made to herself when he was born, that she would protect him, that she would never let him be hurt, that she would be everything he needed. If she were deported, Leo would lose his mother. He would be placed in the foster care system. A system Elena knew too well from her volunteer days at the hospital. Children in that system were moved from home to home, never finding stability, never receiving unconditional love, and Leo would never forgive her. Not because she had tried to save a man, but because she had traded his future to do it. Elena stepped back. Then another step. "I'm sorry," she whispered, though she didn't know if she was apologizing to Arthur or to herself. "I'm so sorry." She turned and ran out of the pantry, ran down the hallway, pushed through the emergency stairwell door, and collapsed on the cold concrete steps, her face in her hands, trying not to sob out loud. She looked at the clock on the wall, 6:50, and she began to count. 18 minutes. The longest 18 minutes of Elena Vargas' life. She sat there, in the emergency stairwell, listening to her own heart pounding in her ears. She imagined what was happening on the 80th floor, Arthur lying on the floor, millions of brain cells dying with every passing minute, every second reducing his chance of recovery. She knew this. She was a nurse. She had studied strokes, the treatment window, the importance of early intervention. She knew that if Arthur got to a hospital within 30 minutes, he could receive clot-busting drugs. He could recover. He could live a normal life. But with every minute that passed without intervention, the damage would become permanent. 6:55, 7 o'clock, 7:15. Elena bit her lip until it bled. She wanted to run back into the office. She wanted to call 911 from a desk phone. She wanted to do anything. But she thought about Leo and she couldn't move. 7:20, 7:30. And then at 7:38, Elena heard the office door open, the click of high heels on marble, the VIP elevator chiming. Evelyn had called the company's private doctor. Not 911, not an emergency ambulance, but a private physician who would arrive more slowly, who would control the information, who would ensure the story was told the way Evelyn wanted it told. Elena stood up, wiped her tears, and walked out of the stairwell. She took the elevator down to the ground floor, returned to the clinic, and sat there, trembling, until her shift ended at 3 in the afternoon. She told no one what had happened, not because she was afraid of Evelyn, though she was, but because she couldn't bear the shame. She had let a man die slowly to protect her son, and though she knew it was the only choice she could make, she still felt like a murderer. That night she went to Sarah's apartment. Sarah was not just a colleague. She was Elena's closest friend since nursing school, the person Elena had cried to when she was fired, the one who had helped her find the clinic job. And that night, a traumatized Elena sat in Sarah's kitchen, drinking tea that she couldn't taste, and confessed everything about those 18 minutes in the stairwell. Sarah listened in horror, holding Elena's hand as she sobbed. "You did what you had to do," Sarah kept saying. "You protected your son. Anyone would have done the same." But Elena shook her head. "I'm a nurse, Sarah. I took an oath, and I just let him die. You didn't let him die. Evelyn killed him. Evelyn made the choice. You just survived." Elena didn't believe her. Not then, not for months. Sometimes the right decisions are also the most painful ones, and sometimes we have to live with the consequences of choices we never wanted to make. Elena's story doesn't end here. In fact, it's only just beginning. And when Arthur Vance wakes up in that rehabilitation facility, he will discover the truth about what happened on that fateful morning. But first, he must face the people he thought were his family. The next part will reveal the cruelty of his children and the betrayal of the person he trusted most. Subscribe now so you don't miss it. Arthur Vance woke up in a private rehabilitation facility in upstate New York 3 days after his stroke. He opened his eyes and saw a white ceiling, fluorescent lights, and a window looking out at bare trees. He tried to move, but the right side of his body didn't respond. He tried to speak, but only meaningless sounds came out of his mouth. The doctor explained to him, with the professional patience Arthur hated, that he had suffered a severe ischemic stroke, resulting in right-side hemiplegia and expressive aphasia. He could understand what others said, but producing speech and moving the right side of his body would require a very long recovery process, and there were no guarantees. Arthur lay there, his sharp mind trapped in a prison of broken flesh. He wanted to scream, he wanted to fire everyone, he wanted to return to his office and take back his empire. But he could do nothing, and then his children came. Trent arrived on the 3rd day. He wore an unwrinkled Tom Ford suit, a Rolex on his wrist, and brought a lawyer with him. Trent didn't look at his father's twisted face. He looked straight at the doctor and asked about the will, about power of attorney, about who would manage Arthur's assets while he was unable to make decisions for himself. Arthur lay there, tears of rage streaming from his left eye, and Trent never saw them. Ashley came on the 5th day, the golden child. She walked in, wrinkling her nose at the smell of antiseptic, and burst into tears. But she cried beautifully, calculated tears. She took Arthur's weak left hand, squeezed it lightly, and said, "Daddy, you have to be strong. I have a charity gala at the Met tonight. I have to go now." She kissed his forehead and left, her high heels clicking away. Derek came on the 9th day, stayed exactly 11 minutes, signed some medical forms, complained about the parking, and left. By the 3rd week, Arthur was completely alone. Just the rotating nurses, the physical therapists who bent his stiff fingers and offered empty encouragement, and Evelyn Cross. Evelyn visited him on a Friday afternoon, bringing a basket of imported fruit and a warm, chilling smile. "Arthur," she said, sitting beside his bed, "you look much more stable. I'm here to give you an update." The board of directors held an emergency meeting this morning. According to the corporate charter, Article 12, Section 4, in the event the CEO is incapacitated and unable to manage duties for more than 14 consecutive days, the board will appoint an interim CEO to protect shareholder interests. She paused, adjusting her Hermes silk scarf. They voted unanimously, Arthur. I will be taking over your position. Don't worry. I'll keep the Vance capital ship from sinking. You just rest, heal, the outside world, leave it to me. Arthur screamed in his mind. He knew exactly what Evelyn was doing. She wasn't just stealing the company. She was legalizing a coup. She would sell off his most prized assets, divide the spoils among her faction, and turn his legacy into ashes. He tried to move his right arm to slap her. His right arm lay motionless on the stark white bedsheets. Evelyn chuckled softly, stood up, and patted his left shoulder. Rest, Arthur. You've worked too hard your whole life. The door closed. The room fell into silence. Arthur Vance closed his eyes. He had spent his entire life building impenetrable walls. He had optimized his life, eliminated every risk, every emotion, every meaningless attachment. He had fired the only woman who actually cared about his biological rhythm, just over a risk assessment report. And now, as the walls collapsed, he realized he wasn't a king in a castle. He was just a prisoner, buried alive in the very machine he had created. 11 days passed. Not a single phone call, not a single text. Until one afternoon, exactly at 3:40, when the late afternoon sun slanted through the window, casting pale yellow streaks across the beige tile floor. From the end of the hallway, a sound echoed, the soft sound of rubber soles touching the floor, and with it, a flashing light. The door to his room slowly opened. Elena Vargas stood in the doorway, her hand gripping Leo's. I know you didn't expect us, Elena said, her voice calm, but there was no one else. Insisted on coming. Leo, 5 years old, climbed onto the stool and opened the Tupperware container of still warm arroz con pollo. The aroma of home-cooked food filled the sterile room. Open your mouth, Leo said, his voice serious. Arthur parted his lips, and as the first spoonful of rice touched his tongue, as the boy used a napkin to wipe the drool from the corner of his mouth, as he used a warm cloth to wash his atrophied legs, Arthur Vance cried. He didn't cry from physical pain. He cried from the greatness of a child's compassion, and from the smallness, the selfishness, the terrible cruelty of his own life. And then Nurse Sarah, Elena's close friend, the one who had heard Elena confess everything about those 18 minutes in the stairwell, entered the room, waited for Elena and Leo to step outside, and told Arthur everything. About the 6 a.m. shift, about the sound of the shattered cup, about Evelyn Cross, and about those 18 minutes Elena spent in the stairwell, biting her lip raw, forced to let him die slowly just to protect her son. Those 18 minutes, Mr. Vance, Sarah sobbed, are the reason you're lying here. Evelyn used a mother's fear to sentence you to death. And Elena, she comes here every day, skipping meals to afford the train fare, not because she forgives you, but because she's atoning for those 18 minutes of weakness years ago. Arthur lay there, his soul torn apart. The next afternoon, Leo returned. He placed his small, warm hand on the back of Arthur's paralyzed right hand. Mr. Arthur, today my school is going to the zoo, but I'm not going. Mama said we can't abandon people when they're in the dark. And right at that point of contact, the index finger of Arthur's right hand, the finger that had been motionless for 85 days, twitched. Arthur smiled. He would not die, he would live, and he would make Evelyn Cross, along with his ungrateful children, pay. But to do that, he needed a voice, he needed a lawyer, and he needed Elena Vargas. Arthur Vance has found his will to live, but the battle to reclaim his empire from the vultures has only just begun. How can a paralyzed man, unable to speak clearly, turn the tables against a ruthless female CEO and a greedy board of directors? How will Elena Vargas react when Arthur uses his remaining fortune to repay her for those 18 desperate minutes? Part 3. The final chapter. The Return of the King and the Final Judgment will bring you a satisfying revenge and tear-soaked redemption. Subscribe now and turn on notification so you don't miss it. See you in Part 3.